Again, thank you for coming today. Today we're going to be talking about a topic that I wanted to talk about a little bit for a number of months. And so this week and next week, this is a two-part series. And are we okay? This is a two-part series that on this topic of Seva, but it's got a word in front of it, which is Ananda Seva. So in a sense, what I'd like to speak about is today I want to speak about generally about Seva in, you might say, the broader sense of what Seva is. And then next week I want to apply that more particularly and also go into the question of how. So you might say, this week we're going to talk about what, and next week we'll talk about how. And but to give us a little context, I'd like to talk about the larger aspect of Seva itself and what that means. Maybe also at the same time we're talking about what it doesn't mean. And this, I mentioned that I wanted to speak about this topic for some months in the past, because some of you may remember when Nayaswami Jyotish was here, he had gone up to the charitable work that Ananda or Paramahansa Yogananda Trust is doing in Vrindavan, and he was, helping the widows there and doing that outward serviceful work. And he was very impressed with it, the number of people that are doing that and the spirit that they were doing it with. And he came to the realization that our work has been given to us by our gurus, and Swami, through the example of his life, had always emphasized that we're a work that is dedicated to meditation and service. Sometimes it said service and meditation. It may be depending upon the individual and their circumstances, but it's always said in that context that there's these two aspects of our work, that what we do, and we speak quite a bit about meditation. You might say that's the big, 75, 80, 90% of what we talk about has something to do with meditation, Kriya Yoga, the inner path, the inward focus of our lives, calming the mind, all of these sorts of inward topics. But how often do we speak about the other? Because it's the other half, the service and the meditation, and how do we address that? And we perhaps would like to give some attention to that. So Jyotish Ji was contemplating that, and he intended, and still does intend, to set himself to write a book about Ananda, which he called Ananda Seva, just like we have Ananda Yoga. And he says, why not Ananda Seva? And how we can, as a Sangha, in individuals, apply that concept into our personal lives. And the idea is here that these two of meditation, Seva, are not opposed to each other. They're actually complementary to each other, and both of them focus upon what is essential for all of us, and which we're going to explore a little bit today. What is it? Why do we say it? Why do we do Seva? What is Seva? Why? And so let's look at that topic today and see where it might go. And of course, when we speak about service, serving, there's always this story that I'm sure all of you have heard many times, but I'd like to start with that story because it's very pertinent to what we're talking about today. And this is, of course, the story of one of the elderly devotees of Yogananda at the ashram there. Yogananda told her one day, she was doing quite a bit of, she was doing various chores that were assigned to her by Yogananda. And Yogananda looked at her one day and he says, you're working, you should not work so hard. You're working much too hard. And so she thought about that. and said, oh, okay. And so then she looked at what she was doing in her life, and she tried to reorganize her life so she wasn't working quite so hard, her tasks. But she found that as she did that, Yogananda gave her more tasks to do. And then she said, well, okay. So then she was very dedicated and, helping him with his work. She did more and of those tasks. And again, he looked at her after a little while, some day he says, I tell you, you're really working much too hard. You're working too much. You need to stop working so hard because you're going to ruin your health. She was one of the older ones. You're going to ruin your health if you continue to work so hard. So she thought about that. It made perfectly good sense. And so she started to, reorganize her life. And he gave her more things to do. And this kept going on. She said this number back and forth this went. And more and more and more was given. And he kept scolding her. Until finally one day she said to him, Sir, instead of using the word work, why don't we use the word serve? And then Yogananda laughed. He says, it's been a good fun, hasn't it? Because that's what he was trying to get her to do. That she had been working. And he was trying to get her to say, no, don't work so hard. Serve, you see. And it's in the mindset, you could say, between service and work. Outwardly, perhaps it may look quite similar, but inwardly, that which we bring to what we're doing has made all the difference in the world between work and service. And actually, that part that sometimes is overlooked in that story, where he did say to her, he says, you're going to ruin your health if you keep on working so hard. A lot of people in modern day and age, they're just frazzled. Corporate workshops. I don't know if you bring this up or not, but work, and I'm overloaded. Yes, you are, and your boss gives you more. And how do you look at it? And how we look at what we do in life actually does affect our health, or how we're feeling about what we're doing, the tensions and the reluctance and the opposition and all of that. Oh, I don't want to do it, and I've got too much. Well, think about it. We have to do something in life. What really, in the final matter, does it really matter what it is we're doing? I guess you could say one is a little bit more physically challenging than another if you're that type of work, but it's about what's going on inside of us that determines whether something is work, tension producing, that reluctance, or whether it's not. We do a lot of activities that are very physically challenging that we enjoy. We go out walking, we run, we do all these things. We don't think of them as, oh my God, you shouldn't do so much, you're going to ruin your health. No. But why? What's going on here? And that same thing applies to when we talk about work and service. So I want to start, and I have to have a scribe here. I want to ask you this question. I want you to tell me, what is the difference between work in the way that Master was referring here, work and service? Now, I want to show somebody to raise their hand and to make a stab at it. Okay, Savarna, then now you have to summarize this into 2 words, or 2, so it fits on one line, in other words.
Work based on ego and service based on unity.
Okay, so how are you going to write that down, Glizzy? Work versus service. Yeah, that's good. Service is okay. Give me somebody else. Give it a try. What's the difference between work and service? Now, I don't want to have to call on you, but put you on the spot. So good. Now we got 4 or 5. Okay. Surya's went up first.
Work is for self-gain, and service is self
It's okay. That's pretty good. Pretty good. Okay. Oshme, what did you say? It's pretty much the same thing. Okay. Okay. Anybody else? Okay, Prisha.
Maybe work is more externally oriented and service is more internally.
Okay. Internal versus external. Okay, Aditya, you had your hand up.
So then you work, sometimes work often takes energy from us, service brings energy.
Ah, that's pretty good. That's pretty good. Anybody else want to give it a stab? We've got a little room on the bottom here.
Work is like expect appreciation when you work, and service is surrender.
Okay.
Yeah, surrender versus appreciation.
Okay, we've got probably room for one or two more lines.
Willingness.
So I think work sometimes may be done forcefully, and service is something which was from inside. So
Yeah, compulsion versus or forceful. Yeah, compulsion versus what's the opposite?
Willingness.
The willingness, right? Yeah, willingness. Okay. Oh, so wait a minute, stay help because we may only have room for one.
When you're serving, you're attuned to the higher self. And when you're working, it's all about material possessions or material desires.
So how are you going to say that in a couple of words? Okay.
Attunement.
Versus
Desires. Worldly desires.
Worldly desires versus attunement to the
Attunement to the higher self.
attunement to the higher.
okay. Well, that's enough. We've run out of board space. But I think you all get the idea. There's a theme that has been running through these answers. That you have on the one side you have service, and you have on the other side you have work, and they're counter. And somewhat times they work against each other, and there's a certain directionality to what we're talking about between the difference between service, the difference between service and work. And we have to understand that there is a direction that we want to go. When we talk about why should we serve, why should we perform seva, it's not arbitrary that, well, it's a nice thing because we help somebody else, which we do. All this is a very good thing, but there's some basic internal reason also for ourselves that makes it important. And when we speak about coming back to this theme of living a balanced life, and we're speaking about balanced here, it's not, and when we speak about balance, we're saying how can both sides of the balance. And as we said, we started where Master and Swamiji emphasized we need to have, we live a life, a sadhana life, of balance between meditation and service. Now, many people think, well, I live a very balanced life, and their balance is, well, during the day I cheat my customers, and at night I give it all to God, you know. And of course, that's not quite the balance that we're talking about. We're talking about, because that's not in balance, and we're talking two different ways of approaching life, you might say expressions, but yet both leading to the same goal. And so consequently, because how often do we meditate, really? How much do we meditate? The monks were here a couple nights ago doing their satsang, and they're left off for Kandala now to have up there. And they were talking about wanting to really dedicate their life and set up a routine for, a monastic routine. And they're talking about a goal of meditating 5 hours a day. That leaves 19. What do they do the rest of the 19? Now, 5 hours. Very few people are meditating 5 hours a day. So that's a goal. And even them, perhaps they're not up to that. But they're looking to goal for that, try to get to that point in their life. But that's still, even at that level, it leaves a lot of other time as well. And so let's just say the devotee, the person, we encourage a person to take level 1, start meditating, getting involved. Maybe they're meditating an hour a day. You fill in whatever it is for you, but let's say an hour a day. That leaves the rest of the day. What happens the rest of the day? And that of course, leads to the second story you've all heard many times, or probably have heard many times, about how Swami went. It was in Vancouver, Canada, and he was visiting the man. He's doing a program there, and his host for this program took him home and showed him his home, and very beautiful, big, nice, beautiful home, and showed him all the rooms. And then the last room he showed him was his meditation room. And he went in there, and he said, I know, beautiful meditation room. He says, I'm sort of somewhat dismissively putting the rest of it aside, and said, this is where my day really begins, right here in this room. That's my real life here. And thinking, of course, that would be a very pious thing to say, you see, because here he's showing Swami Kriyananda's his house, and Swami would maybe compliment on that attitude. But Swami said, I'm so sorry to hear that. That's because he was somewhat dismissing the rest of his day. He says, what about the rest of the day? Yes, you have this, but we don't go into our meditation room with the idea of that's where my real life is. No, that's where you're there for that period of time doing that aspect of our life. But the rest of the life, that sort of implies that the rest of the life is something of a throwaway, something that doesn't matter too much, something that we can waste that time. But no, in the ideal sense, what we do inwardly and what we do outwardly must complement each other. We must make use of them in the way that's going to both help us to attain that which we're trying to attain. And so if we're going to understand what Seva is, as opposed to work, Seva is that which is going to complement what we do in our meditation. So consequently, the very same purpose, but one has an inward focus and applies to that. The other has, you might say, an application of that inward focus when we meditate, applied in our day-to-day life. But both of them have the same goal, by perhaps different means. Now, Master emphasized, of course, meditation. We have to go in, dive deep. It's much more difficult to do that outwardly in our outward expressions. But nevertheless, one must complement, as opposed to that example of the shopkeeper, where they don't complement each other, they oppose each other. We have to be doing something outwardly expressive that is going to complement what we do inwardly, or else we're not really going to be able to progress with what we're trying to do inwardly. People have a difficult time meditating because their outward world is in opposition to what they're trying to do inwardly. And it's not so much the action itself, but it's the attitude that they bring to it. It's the mental process, how it fits into the larger aspect of their life. So what is it that we're trying to do? Why do we meditate? What is meditation? And of course, there's many different. A lot of these are very good answers for that. The ego, humility, self-gain, selfless. These are all attitudes that we bring to our meditation as well. But another word you could say that nobody used here, you could say that service, as is meditation, is self-offering. Offering, and of course that top one up there, ego, of course that is what is being self-offered, is we're in the highest sense. But that takes on a number of different expressions outwardly. Symbolically, we're offering, when we serve, we're offering ourselves, we're offering something, and we meditate, we're offering also. So if meditation and service are similar, we need to approach also our meditation with that attitude of service, that attitude of self-offering, of giving ourselves to something higher. And what we offer, of course, is that ego attachment, that ego sense of self. Now, for service to be complementary to that, it too is a form of self-offering. I'm offering myself in service to something higher, as opposed to approaching life as gain for myself. Now, this is unfortunately what you see in so many people in life. Their number one purpose in life, and it seems quite natural, is to gain for themselves. And people say, of course, I gain for myself so that, well, I can share it, of course, with other people, but gain, personal gain, in everything I do is their number one motivation. Now, it takes different forms, but what do they do with that gain? You know, it's really needs to be taken for the devotee to the next step. It's whatever comes is we offer it up to something higher. And in every action, there's a certain amount of self-offering. And in this way, we begin to find, if we approach that inner meditation with the self-offering of ourself up to God, into the light, into expansion, into bliss, then the same attitude has to be applied also to what we do in our outward service as well. Now, there's another word. I said self-offering could have been mentioned, because what we're doing in service is we're offering. Oftentimes, just physically, would you like some chai? And that's an offering, but it's symbolic of something. What you're really doing is you're offering your service to somebody else when you're doing that. So you could say, this is more for next week, as I said, we're not going to speak about, for those of you who came late, we're more going to speak about the how is next week. But you could say, even in that, you do these symbolic gestures as a way to stimulate that. So consequently, the consciousness of serving that chai to somebody else is a sense of you're offering. Now, are you offering just a cup of tea? Well, it's the form there, but you're offering there's a heart element. A true service is you're offering, you feel the person who's receiving it. You go into a shop, here's your cup of tea, and he slides it down the counter versus somebody who graciously gives you that tea. They're giving you a form of love in the way. They're offering something, a hospitality. It's from the heart. And that's what and then you feel it and you say, oh, this tea is really good because it has a meal. You offer somebody a meal. It's not just food. It's something more beyond food. And the cook, of course, and whoever serves it, they offer that. And there's that is imbued in what it is, and the attitude in the process by which we're offering. And in a sense, we're offering part of ourself to the other person. But are you really offering it to the person? The guest is God. And if you see that, so who are you offering it to? How are you offering that? It's God and that other person. So consequently, isn't that just similarly the expression of what we do at night when we meditate? We sit before our altar, we offer ourselves to God, and in the same way, we approach everything we do can be approached in that same spirit. Now, so that in the sense of self-offering could have been one other word. Another word that could have been used is sacrifice. Sacrifice. Now, I want to put an adjective in front of that, a modifying word in front of that sacrifice, because there's sacrifice, oh my God. And then there's, he wants a cup of tea. and here I am so busy working so hard, and now sacrifice is a good word to use, but the modifying word is joyful sacrifice. Now there's a big difference. Joyful sacrifice. Now what is sacrifice? They're interesting. If you read the Gita, it says, one who is unwilling to sacrifice is a thief. That's saying it pretty hard. One who is unwilling to sacrifice is a thief. Now, why is that? What is a thief? A thief is somebody who takes things from other people, or somebody who takes away for themselves. So a person who approaches life, I'm taking from life. It's personal gain. I take and I take and I take. But sacrifice is one who is willing to, let's say you had a fire here. You throw into the fire all of these things that have come to you during the day. You release them into that fire. That which has come to you, you sacrifice back and you give back. In symbolic form, you're giving back that which has come to you. So life itself has given us something. And that person who's not willing to give back, in whatever form that might be, it could take many forms, but if one doesn't give back, one doesn't sacrifice. But it's not the thing that you give back. You see, many people sacrifice, well, I go to the temple and I give some money there. I put some money in that little, did you all know what that thing is? That's where you can put money there. Just pointing it out. But anyway, I put some money in there. Now, I'm done. That's not really sacrifice. That's not really sacrifice. It has to be with the right attitude. You're symbolically giving back to something and you're giving back to life. You're giving back to God. From everything, all that has come to me in life has come from God. And to recognize that, you see, first, to recognize it in our heart, that's then when we give back, it's meaningful. But if you don't recognize that which has come to you has come from God, well, where is the sacrifice? You have to give back to that source from which everything has come to you. And so consequently, you could say that Seva are actions of sacrifice, of giving back. And now I said joyful sacrifice, because if one gives compulsive, under compulsion, maybe somebody put that word up there, I don't know, but I don't know, it's work. It's work, it's not service. You see, to willingly and joyfully give back to life, to be able to, and that life, or to God, and the God, of course, is expressed in whatever it is that we offer our sacrifice and we offer our service to, and we see God in what it is that we're giving back to, then we've turned an action into a service. And this, of course, is what helps us balance our life between service and meditation, because what we're doing is when we give away from ourselves, we're lightening the burden, you might say. All those things that we are carrying on our shoulders, responsibilities and on and on, all of those things, those heavy loads. This is what makes people tired. Then they go to work. I have all of these things to do. I have all of these duties. I have these responsibilities. And the word, of course, is I. You see, I am doing this, I'm doing that. And, of course, that eventually that becomes quite a big burden. And we have to unload that burden and say, it's God's. But I'm an instrument of God. I'm serving God, and I give it all back. I give it all back in my service. God serving God. This is in the highest sense, that's what we want to come to. And that's, of course, that phrase was what Master said when he, in his latter years of his life, his knees were physically bothering him quite a bit, painful. So he was being driven up to a discourse that he had to give, and he had to, walk from the car to the podium and the place where he was to stand. And when the car drove up, monks opened the door, and the monks helped him out. And then they helped him up to the podium where he was supposed to give the discourse. And he said, oh, and the Master thanked the monks. Oh, thank you for helping me up. And they said, oh, no, Master, no. It's we who should be thanking you. And so he said, that's God's play. It's God helping God. And that's how it is. This is how we see in life. God provides for us, and then symbolically we then don't hang on to it, but then we offer it all back up. And this is why we have sacrifice. And this is because this is just symbolic, really. And it's taken on a little bit of this tinge of, I'm giving up something when I sacrifice. It's like a burden. And if I unload a burden, I get good karma, right? Because if sacrifice, well, yes, you do get good karma, but it's not karma we want. We don't want good karma. We want to get rid of karma. And that's only comes when it's done in the right attitude. And that's joyfully, I have the opportunity to sacrifice. I've been given this wonderful chance to be able to let go of all of these things, and I put it in the fire. Now, the same thing, actually, if you, a little bit onto the side topic, but the word tapasya, you could also say that tapasya is service also. But tapasya has a little bit of a connotation of, it's hard. But no, if it's joyful, tapasya, because all tapasya really is a gathering up of our energies and having control, gaining control of our energies and positively directing them in the right, or directing them in the right direction. And that's what tapasya is learning. And so seva is a chance for us to practice tapasya in the right ways. It allows us to gather ourselves and to direct it in the right way. And what is the right way? Away from the little self. That's really all it is directing it to God, directing it to something higher. Oftentimes, this is the basic principle here, is service allows us to do right action. It is right action in everything we do. And what is right action? It's that action that takes us away from ego involvement. It's that action which leads to freedom. And if we do those actions that lead to freedom, but in a perhaps common languages in a special way, but it's transcending the ego, letting it go, and those things that complement each other in outward action versus inward, in what we do inwardly during our meditation, those are the things that we want to have complement each other so that they both lead to that same goal. Now, so we have to act in this world. So this is, of course, a basic principle of the first few chapters of the Bhagavad Gita. Action is necessary. As long as Lahiri Mahashaya said it this way, you must act as long as you're breathing the free air of this world, you are obliged to give grateful service. Long as you're breathing the free air of this world, you are under obligation to give service. That's sort of like what the one of Krishna and the thief. It's a statement. We're under obligation as long as we're breathing. Now, of course, if we're not breathing, we're either one, we're not in this world anymore, or two, we're in superconsciousness, we're in samadhi at that time. You could say that, and we're not breathing anymore, we're no longer in the ego. You see, as long as we're in the ego, we're breathing. When we're transcend the ego, and so this has a deeper, you might say, mystical side to it, a yogic side to it. But as long as we're acting ego active, we have to act. And of course, the Gita goes on, Krishna goes on to say, there's no such thing as non-action. Everything is action. Even breathing is action. Even whether we want to or not. Sitting still is still action as long as you're breathing. So as long as we're breathing, we're under obligation to give grateful service. Everything we do. It's not sometimes. It's in what Krishna is, or Lahiri is saying there. He says, that is the attitude that we have to act with. Everything has to be in that grateful service. Now, notice he says grateful. Grateful. I'm gratitude that this is a gift has been given to me. That's what you feel when you feel grateful. So you appreciate something that has come to you. And when you appreciate something, the natural impact or the natural impulse is to that energy has come to you in the form of a gift, is to then pass through you and you give it back. So this is the natural impulse. You receive, and you don't hold on. You see, and this is unfortunately what we do and we don't. When we work, we've received a gift and we stop that cycle. We don't give it back. God's given, we give it back to God. God gives, we give back to God. And that cycle, when we're in that cycle, then we then go beyond this ego attachment, all the little pains and sufferings that we must undergo when we're identified with the little self. Now, if this is so, and we have to act, then we come into, you might say, the practical aspect of this. Now, that was what I've said so far is kind of theoretical. It is theory, but it's very practical in the sense that that's what we have to do. But when you apply this, if we have to act, let's be practical. Do a good thing. In other words, because philosophers will argue, well, it doesn't matter what I do, as long as I do it in the right spirit. Now, if you're not breathing the free air of this world, that probably is true. And if you're a master, you could probably do anything, and it's an act of grace, because you're in tune with God's will at that level. But let's say some of us are not at that point yet. Here we are breathing. And it does matter what you do. It does matter. And again, Krishna in the Gita, he talks about there's different types of service. Tamasic, Rajasic, Sattvic service, and it matters. Now, all of these things, if they're embodied, you're going to create karma if you do. And it's going to elevate you or it's going to depress you. So it does matter what you do, because it has an impact. So tamasic service is something that's darkening to your consciousness or darkening to other people's consciousness. Those aren't helpful things to do. So why do those? Rajasic things tend to be those things that are done with a sense of attachment. They're, in other words, I give you something, but what's for me? But sattvic things are those that are freeing, you might say. Those actions that are going to, if not perfectly in themselves, are going to take you in that direction of being freeing. So let's do those actions that are going to be useful to us. And that's where it comes in. That's where the discrimination comes in, of learning to do those things that are going to be freeing for us. Now, as it is so much of when we speak about these sorts of things, you can't say that the same action for you is going to be the same action for you, because it varies according to what's going to be helpful for one person may not always be helpful for the other person to do if you define your service by outward form. One person does something and it's great for them to do, is like the shopkeeper who's very greedy. If he does a little something that thinks about his customer, well, of course, that's going to be good for him. But of course, you know, the saint, he has a little higher standards. And so it would be, so it depends upon where a person's consciousness is. But as long as that consciousness is moving in the right direction, heading upward, or consider heading directionally, then for that person, it's right. It's a good action. Seva is right for that person. So we have to look for ourselves. What is going to be helpful when you act, because your actions create karma for yourself. And so if it's better, of course, to do actions that are going to create good karma for you, even though it is you don't want any karma, you want to be perfectly free, but you're not free. We're not free. And as long as we're not free, we need to do those things that are going to take us in that direction. So consequently, it does matter. Some people will say sometimes, well, you hear this said, well, they did something wrong. You know, they really hurt somebody, they caused problems. And they say, well, my intentions were good. Does that absolve them of consequences? I really did the wrong thing. In retrospect, I shouldn't have done it. And I'm really sorry. They still have karma. Being sincere, even if they're doing it with the thought, I'm sincerely doing this because I think I'm doing the right thing. You see, in other words, I'm ignorant. And I'm doing the right thing because I'm ignorant. Does that absolve them from karma? No, it doesn't. But it helps. Because obviously the heart is what, it doesn't stick quite so heavily. If a person does the wrong thing for wrong, they're intentional, obviously they're going to accrue a more heavy karma because they're bound, it's very binding, because the heart is involved in that. But if a person's heart is in the right place and they still did the wrong thing, that because of ignorance, they should have known better, well, they'll have to accrue. The karma is still there, but it doesn't stick quite so bad. But it doesn't free us. So we want to act in a way we have to use the gifts that God has given us and act appropriately. God gives us intelligence to try to do something. And you could say that no action is perfect. And so and as long as we're in this world acting, we're going to accrue karma, even under the best of circumstances, as long as we're in this body. But yet, let's do something that's going to be helpful. Now, helpful to other people is good. Helpful to ourselves especially. It's going to expand our sympathies, expand our sense of self. But if we can also help other people at the same time, that's even better. Because why? We see that we have become a channel for God's love, let's say in this case. We have become a channel for God's love. We see other people have helped. That helps us understand that those are children of God, I'm children of God, the differences between us, and we see a larger good being done. So naturally that's going to expand our sense of self to include other people, rather than, might say, keeping, as Sri Yukteswar said to Yogananda, when Yogananda was wanting not to be expansive in certain situation, he says, you want to keep all the cheese for yourself. Even though what he was doing was okay, but he says, you want to keep all the cheese for yourself. You need to, and then that's even better. So it's not good versus bad, it's good versus better. And so because it helps us by expanding. And of course, in Master's case, that was his duty as an avatar. And I don't think he was really being reprimanded by Sri Yukteswar, but I think it was for the purpose, it was for our sake that he wrote that don't keep the cheese just for yourself. And you find that this also, stepping into the world of practicality, the act of service opens up the doors of personal, material, as well as spiritual prosperity. To serve, we become a channel for God's love. Something goes through us. I mentioned this a little earlier. A cycle is created, and we don't block it by hanging on to it ourselves. I'm in this for myself. I've stopped it. But when we serve in the right spirit, we're allowing that God's energy, God's blessings, whatever it might be, material blessings, we're allowing it to go through us and sharing it with others. That cycle opens up the door for more to come in. And this is the secret. You find that some people are just, because they have good karma, they're born with wealth, they're born with good circumstances, but that's been accrued in the past for past actions perhaps. They've been born with that. If a person takes what has been given, you see this sometimes, people inherit large fortunes. And it's typically said that large fortunes, family fortunes, now at least I don't know if this is true in India or not, but it was in America, a study had been done. They say usually within 3 generations, the fortune is gone. That's the grandchildren. By the time it gets to the grandchildren, there's not much left. Because, and basically the point was being that people dissipate. They don't replenish. They don't replenish that fortune. That cycle is not fed. And so consequently, it's just used selfishly or wasted away. And now that's an outward thing, but this is a spiritual principle. That which comes to us, if we invest energy that comes to us, and the investment is, the first thought is, I am going to invest it in myself. But the true investment is planting more seeds out there by, you might say, giving it away. That's not quite right, not giving it away, but using it in a positive way that then wealth begins to grow in that way. And this is a spiritual principle, but it's also very much a material principle as well. True prosperity comes, and true prosperity is not the physical. True prosperity is the spirit that one gains, the power that comes by learning to keep that cycle of replenishment of what comes, giving it back, opening the door for more to come. Again, in that cycle of prosperity, one's sense of self begins to grow. And then this attitude is also in Seva as well. Not so much that we're giving the chai, because in the back of my mind I'm going to think, well, I'm going to get 2 chais back. Now we've defeated the purpose there by having that attitude. But by opening the door of giving, we find in very mysterious ways life replenishes us, and that we become the beneficiary in one form or another. And materially this applies, but the real wealth that we're giving back is love in the heart, peace of mind, inner happiness, a sense of expansion of who I am, and those inner blessings, those inner wealth, that is what we see begin to increase. And so I'm going to go into more next week. You might say the application of this concept. As long as we're going to give, let's give thoughtfully, or as long as we're going to serve, as long as we're going to serve, how do we do that? How can we serve even better? How can we serve to actually increase ourselves in the direction that we want to go, of what our direction is, which is freedom? How can we do it intelligently and make it actually not just a concept, but actually make it a practice? And I'm going to stop there because we only have 5 minutes left, and I want to allow at least 1 or 2 questions. Maybe in that 5 minutes, I should have stopped about 5 minutes ago, but you know how I am. I just keep going. So anyway, is there a question? Somebody has to think about a question. I did you. In your position is, what do you ask a question?
Question on work.
Oh, any work versus service, a question of what is service, something that's not clear.
I think we'll address it next time, that I want to see how we can fill our days and maybe even make a small list of how we can serve throughout the day.
That's what we want to cover. I think we want to cover next week some of the ways to put this practically into application. So that's going to be next week.
I have a comment that I think that just the way what some of the things you reminded and shared, it feels like we are really serving our higher self.
Serving our higher self, yeah.
It's like if we can apply some of these things, happiness, joy, energy can start coming.
Yeah. No, I didn't say this because I don't want you to take it the wrong way and think of this way, but actually, serving, who are we really serving? We're serving God, you could say, but we really are serving our higher self. And then you could think, I'm really serving myself. What's in it for me? This is the best way for me to get. Now, but I would say, even if one thinks it in that terms, if it gets you to do it, it's probably going to take you in the right direction. But then you realize that, no, there's something more than just serving myself. But for a person who has no sense of service at all, even to do it for selfish motives is, because, maybe I'll get some more coming back. Like if I say thank you to the person who gave me this gift, maybe he'll give me another one. Well, if you never said thank you before, that's probably a good thing. That's how children are sometimes. You have to now say thank you, and that it's not really sincere yet. But you've taught them. You see, you've taught them good manners, and for children, then eventually children grow up, and then they learn that there's more to it. But yes.
So how do we balance the meditation and the service? So if we say that service is, we're actually serving our higher selves, and when we meditate, we are actually also trying to reach out to our higher selves. So is it both one and the same? Well,
They're not. They have this. The question, in case for the recording, is how do we balance meditation and service if they're both the same thing? Now, they're not exactly the same thing. They have the same purpose, but they're leading to freedom from smallness, freedom from ego attachment, but they're using different means to be able to do that. And how much one does versus the other depends upon a person's circumstances in life.
So, a follow-up question, the same thing. So in the satsang that Devashiji was saying that he went through a period of time when he couldn't meditate for very long, and then when he was serving, was doing the rest of the day, he just kept God in his heart and he offered everything of himself to God. So is that something that people could do if they
Absolutely. He gave a very good example. Devrishi had some very serious physical problems that prevented him from being able to meditate for more than 5-10 minutes. It was a chore for him to go much beyond that. And so, but that expression of meditation, of self-offering, of which is at the base of what meditation is. We're self-offering in an inward sense our ego identification, our attachments, our sense of littleness, which we do in a certain way inwardly. And of course, this is ultimately what Kriya Yoga is too. The practice of Kriya is at its essence self-offering of that life force itself, which is behind all of this. He couldn't do that. And so he said, well, I have to serve in some fashion. And so he mentally, he tried to practice in his case, I believe he was talking about practicing the presence of God, and that's a beautiful thing. We should talk more about that next week, because and we have to find what can we do, because people go through different phases in life. A person like now those brahmacharis, they're at a certain point in their life where circumstances have allowed them to do the inward search very intensely. But many of us find ourselves in family situations, career, job, all of these things that don't allow those circumstances. But that doesn't relieve us of the obligation, as Lahiri said, to offer grateful service, which is what meditation should be approached as too. It's service also, but in a different form. So we're all under obligation. But outward circumstances, we have to pick and choose how we do that. But that attitude we bring to it is we're all obligated to bring it to that, and then turn whatever it is that we're doing into an act of service, of self-offering. So next week we're going to explore how, but I'm going to stop right now because it's 12 o'clock, and in 1 minute the next class begins, which is a meditation teacher training class. So all of those that are participating in that, please stay back, or let's take a little break, 5-minute break. And then let's come back and we'll start the second class. So thank you all very much, and I hope to see you all back next week, and we'll continue this discussion.